The muzzle flash lit up Lieutenant Sarah Ghost Sheen's face for a split second, revealing eyes that had seen too much death and still carried the weight of every life she'd taken. The bullet found its mark 800 meters away, dropping. The insurgent sniper who had pinned down her team for the last 20 minutes. Around her, the Afghan mountainside erupted in chaos as enemy fire rained down from positions that seemed carved into the very rock itself. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. 2 more Tangos Northeast Ridge, 700 meters, she whispered into her headset, her voice carrying the calm precision that had earned her the respect of every SEAL in Task Force Neptune. Her spotter, Petty Officer Marcus Bulldog Rodriguez, adjusted the scope calculations with practiced efficiency, his weathered hands steady despite the incoming rounds that splintered the boulder they used for cover. The Dragunov rifle felt like an extension of her Sol 27 confirmed kills in this deployment alone. Each one a life saved among her brothers in arms. But today was different. Today, intelligence had been wrong. Catastrophically wrong. What was supposed to be a routine extraction of a high-value informant had turned into a nightmare scenario that would test every skill she'd honed over 8 years of special operations. Through her scope, Sarah watched as Staff Sergeant Jake Thunder Williams led the assault element up a treacherous goat path, his massive frame somehow moving with the grace of a mountain cat, despite carrying 90 pounds of gear. Thunder had pulled her from a burning Humvee in Ramadi 3 years ago, earning a Purple Heart and a loyalty from Sarah that ran deeper than blood. Behind him, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Maria Angel Vasquez moved like a ghost through the shadows, her medical kit bouncing silently against her back as she covered the team's advance. The valley below them held secrets that went back decades. A natural fortress that had swallowed Soviet divisions and claimed the lives of countless Mujahideen fighters. Local legends spoke of spirits that wandered these peaks, the ghosts of warriors who had died defending their homeland against wave after wave of invaders. Sarah didn't believe in ghosts, but she respected the power of this place, the way it seemed to amplify both courage and terror in equal measure. Her radio crackled with the voice of their team leader, Commander James Viking Larson, his Norwegian accent barely detectable after 15 years of operations. "Ghost, we need eyes on that compound. Intelligence says our asset is being held in the main structure, but I'm counting at least 40 heat signatures on thermal. We're walking into a hornet's nest." Sarah adjusted her position, feeling the familiar burn in her shoulders from maintaining the shooting stance for hours. The compound spread out below them like a medieval fortress, its mud brick walls scarred by decades of warfare. Satellite imagery had shown maybe 15 fighters, but her trained eye could see the reality muzzle flashes from windows that shouldn't exist, movement patterns that spoke of a force 3 times larger than anticipated. "Viking, this is Ghost. I count 50+ enemy combatants dug in deep. They knew we were coming." Her voice carried no emotion, but inside, her mind raced through tactical calculations. 6 SEALs against 50 fighters in prepared positions. The math was brutal. The informant they'd come to extract was Dr. Amara Nazir, a pediatric surgeon who had been providing intelligence on Taliban leadership structure for 8 months. Her information had led to the capture of 3 high-value targets and saved countless civilian lives. But someone had betrayed her location, and now she was being held as bait in what was clearly an elaborate trap. Thunder's voice came through. "Become tight with controlled aggression. Ghost, you seeing that technical with the 50 cal? It's got a clean line of fire on our approach route. That thin'll chew us up before we get within 200 meters of the compound." Sarah tracked her scope to the heavy machine gun mounted on the back of a Toyota pickup, its crew already traversing the weapon toward their position. The gunner wore a distinctive red headband. Ahmad, the butcher, Hassan, a former Afghan national, Army soldier who had defected to the Taliban 2 years ago. Intel photos had burned his face into her memory, along with the gruesome details of his war crimes against captured coalition forces. I see him, thunder. Give me 30 seconds. Sarah's breathing slowed, her heart rate dropping into the zone, where time seemed to stretch and the chaos of battle faded into crystalline focus. This was her element, the place where mathematics met intuition and death became an art form practiced at impossible distances. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of cordite and something else, burning hashish mixed with the metallic tang of blood. Somewhere in that compound, Dr. Nazir was waiting, probably tied to a chair in some underground room, wondering if the Americans would come for her, or if she would become another statistic in Afghanistan's endless war. Bulldog made a minute adjustment to the scope, compensating for the shifting air currents that danced across the valley floor. Winds steady at 4 knots, northwest to southeast, range 850. You've got this, Ghost. Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear Angel's voice providing medical updates on their previous firefight casualties. 2 Afghan National Army soldiers traveling with their convoy had been wounded in the initial ambush that had forced them into this defensive position. Angel's calm professionalism reminded Sarah why she fought not for politics or ideology, but for the people beside her who had become more than family. The compound's main gate swung open, revealing a figure that made Sarah's blood run cold. Dr. Nazir stumbled forward, her traditional Afghan dress torn and bloodied, her hands bound. Behind her back, a tall figure in black tactical gear held an AK-47 to her head. Commander Rashid the Wolf Ahmadzai, the Taliban's chief of operations for this region and the orchestrator of dozens of attacks on coalition forces. All call signs, this is Viking. Commander Larson's voice carried the weight of command and the burden of impossible decisions. They're using our asset as a human shield. We need options, and we need them fast. Intelligence intercepts suggest they're planning to execute her on camera in 20 minutes as retaliation for last week's raid on their weapons cache. Sarah's mind flashed back to that raid-a-night operation that had netted 2 tons of Iranian-supplied explosives destined for improvised explosive devices. The intelligence had come from Dr. Nazir, and now she was paying the price for her courage. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a familiar coat, heavy but necessary. The valley seemed to hold its breath as Sarah tracked her crosshairs across the scene below. The Wolf was using Dr. Nazir as a human shield, but his arrogance was showing. He stood just slightly off-center, believing that 800 meters of distance made him untouchable. He had never faced Ghost, Chen, and her gift for impossible shots, but this shot would require more than skill. It would demand perfection. 1 degree off target meant Dr. Nazir's death. Too low, and the Wolf would disappear back into the compound with his hostage. Too high, and the round would sail harmlessly over the target, alerting every fighter in the valley to their position. Thunder's voice crackled through the radio, carrying news that changed everything. Viking, thermal imaging shows a convoy of technicals approaching from the south. At least 6 vehicles, maybe 8. 8 of 15 minutes. We're about to be completely surrounded. The tactical situation had just evolved from difficult to impossible. Even with perfect shooting, even with flawless teamwork, 6 SEALs couldn't hold off an entire battalion of Taliban fighters in prepared defensive positions. They needed extraction, but the nearest friendly forces were hours away, and helicopter support was grounded due to the mountain weather. Sarah felt the familiar calm descend over her, the state of mind that had carried her through Fallujah, Ramadi, and a dozen other battlefields where the odds had been stacked against survival. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when lives depended on her ability to thread bullets through gaps measured in inches. "Ghost to all call signs," she transmitted, her voice carrying a confidence that belied their desperate situation. "I'm going to take this shot on the Wolf. When that round impacts, Every fighter in that compound is going to know exactly where we are. Hope you boys are ready for the fight of your lives." The scope reticle settled on the wolf's exposed shoulder. The mathematical precision of ballistics calculations running through Sarah's mind like a familiar prayer. Range, 847 meters. Wind, 4 knots, quartering from the northwest. Temperature, -2 degrees Celsius. Altitude, 7,000 feet above sea level. Each variable fed into the equation that would determine weather. Dr. Nazir lived or died, but as Sarah's finger moved toward the trigger, a new sound echoed across the valley, the distinctive whine of incoming artillery rounds. Someone had called for fire support, and it wasn't the Americans. Sarah's finger froze on the trigger as the first artillery round screamed overhead, impacting somewhere behind their position with a thunderous crack that sent shockwaves through the mountain stone. The Taliban had mortar, but this was something. Bigger, possibly 122 mm rockets fired from a position miles away. Someone had been planning this ambush for weeks, maybe months, and her team had walked directly into the kill zone. Incoming. Take cover. Vikings command carried across the tactical net as the team pressed themselves against whatever shelter they could find. Sarah and Bulldog squeezed deeper into their rocky hide, feeling the mountain shake as 3 more rounds impacted in rapid succession. Dust and debris rained down around them, but Sarah never moved her rifle from the target. Through her scope, she watched the wolf drag Dr. Nazir back toward the compound's main building, using the artillery barrage as cover for his movement. The window was closing fast, but Sarah had faced impossible timing before. In Mosul, she had taken out a suicide bomber with only 2 seconds to spare before he detonated his vest in a crowded marketplace. This was just another equation to solve. Another moment where mathematical precision met split-second intuition. "Ghost, we need to move." Bulldog's voice carried urgency, but also trust. He had been her spotter for 18 months, and he knew that when she was locked onto a target, disrupting her concentration could mean mission failure. "Those mortar are walking closer. Next salvo's gonna be right on top of us." Sarah's world contracted to the circle of her scope. Everything else, the incoming artillery, the desperate radio chatter, the knowledge that they were outnumbered 10 to 1 faded into background noise. This was what she had trained for, what she had sacrificed everything to become. Her childhood. In San Francisco's Chinatown, where her grandmother had taught her patience through hours of calligraphy practice. Her teenage years on the rifle team, UC Berkeley, where she had learned that perfection was achieved through repetition and discipline. The wolf paused at the compound's entrance, shouting orders to his fighters in Pashto. Sarah's language training allowed her to understand fragments, something about American snipers, and the need to find their position quickly. He was scared, she realized. For all his reputation as a battlefield commander, he had never faced someone who could reach out and touch him at nearly a kilometer's distance. Dr. Nazir stumbled, her legs giving out from exhaustion and terror. As the wolf bent to pull her upright, he exposed his profile for exactly 1.3 seconds. Sarah had counted. It was enough time for a perfect shot, but the artillery barrage was intensifying, and staying in position much longer would mean death for her entire team. The radio crackled with Angel's voice, providing a medical update that sent ice through Sarah's veins. "Viking, Thunder's hit. Shrapnel to the leg, but he's still mobile. We need to move to a secondary position or we're going to lose him." Thunder, the man who had saved her life, who had taught her how to survive in the urban warfare. Nightmare of Iraq, who treated her not as a woman in a man's profession, but as a warrior worthy of respect. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a cold fury that sharpened her focus to a razor's edge. Bulldog, range to secondary target, the gunner on that technical. Sarah's voice carried no emotion, but her spotter recognized the tone. He had heard it before, in Syria when they had been ambushed by ISIS fighters. in Yemen when insurgents had used children as human shields. It was the voice of someone who had crossed a line and would not be coming back. 720 meters, windage 2 minutes left, Bulldog called out, understanding instantly what she was planning. Ghost, that 50 cal is our biggest threat. You drop that gunner, we might have a chance to maneuver. Through her peripheral vision, Sarah saw Thunder limping between rocks, Angel close beside him providing cover fire with her M4 carbine. Blood stained his camouflage pants, but he was still moving, still fighting. The Taliban fighters were beginning to coordinate their fire, creating intersecting fields that would trap her team in their current position. The Technical's gunner swung his weapon toward Thunder's position, the heavy machine gun's muzzle flashing. As he sent long bursts of .50 caliber rounds into the rocks around the wounded SEAL, Sarah could see the bullets chewing chunks of stone into deadly fragments, turning their cover into a death trap. Her crosshairs settled on the gunner's center mass, but at the last second, she adjusted her point of aim. The man wore a suicide vest. She could see the distinctive bulk under his tactical jacket. A center mass hit might detonate the explosives and damage the vehicle's engine, but it wouldn't necessarily stop the weapon from functioning if someone else took over the gun. Instead, Sarah aimed for the neck, just below the jawline. A precision shot that would sever the spinal cord and drop the target instantly without risk of secondary explosion. The mathematics of death, calculated in millimeters and milliseconds, the trigger broke cleanly, the rifle's recoil driving back into her shoulder as the bullet began its journey across the valley. Through her scope, Sarah watched the 7.62 millimeters round trace its perfect arc, following the laws of physics that had governed her profession since the first humans had learned to kill at distance. The gunner's head snapped back as the bullet found its mark, his body going limp as he collapsed across the heavy machine gun. The weapon fell silent, its barrel pointing harmlessly at the sky, and Sarah was already working the bolt to chamber another round. "Target down," she reported, her voice betraying nothing of the satisfaction she felt at seeing Thunder reach better. "Cover." Bulldog ranged to the mortar crew northwest corner of the compound. But before her spotter could respond, the radio erupted with Viking's voice carrying news that changed everything. "All call signs, be advised, Predator drone overhead reports massive convoy approaching from multiple directions. Estimate 60 to 80 Taliban fighters converging on our position. We are officially in deep shit." The scope revealed the truth of Viking's report. Dust clouds were rising from 3 different valleys, each one kicked up by multiple vehicles carrying reinforcements to what was obviously a carefully planned ambush. Sarah's team hadn't just stumbled into a hornet's nest. They had been lured into it by someone with intimate knowledge of American tactical procedures. "Ghost, Thunder here." The wounded SEAL's voice was tight with pain but determined. "I can still fight, but we need to start thinking about extraction. This whole valley's about to be crawling with bad guys, and we're almost Winchester on ammunition." Sarah knew Thunder was right, but the mathematics of their situation offered no good solutions. They were 8 kilometers from the nearest coalition outpost, trapped in terrain that favored the defenders, and facing odds that would challenge a full company of Marines. Extraction meant abandoning Dr. Nazir to a death that would be broadcast across Taliban propaganda networks within hours. Through her scope, Sarah watched the Wolf emerge from the compound's main building, this time without his hostage. He carried a satellite phone and seemed to be coordinating the movements of the converging forces. Behind him, 2 fighters dragged Dr. Nazir into view, forcing her to her knees in the compound's central courtyard. The message was clear: surrender or watch the informant die slowly. Sarah had seen Taliban execution videos, knew the specific horrors that awaited Dr. Nazir if the SEALs withdrew. The surgeon had risked everything to help American forces, had provided intelligence that had saved dozens of coalition lives, and now she was paying the price for her courage. Viking, this is Ghost, Sarah transmitted, her voice carrying a resolve that surprised even her. I'm staying to provide overwatch. You get the team to the extraction point, and I'll keep these bastards. Heads down until help arrives. Negative, Ghost. We don't leave anyone behind. That's not how we operate. Viking's response carried the weight of SEAL tradition, but also the practical reality that sacrificing one team member to save the others was sometimes the only tactical option. Angel's voice joined the conversation, carrying the steady professionalism that had made her one of the most respected combat medics in Special Operations Command. Ghost, Thunder needs medical attention soon. That shrapnel hit an artery, and I'm running low on supplies to keep him stabilized. We need extraction within 30 minutes, or we're going to lose him. The equation was becoming clearer, but no. Less brutal. Save Thunder and abandon Dr. Nazir, or stay and fight against impossible odds with the likely outcome being the death of everyone Sarah cared about. Mathematics had always provided clear answers to complex problems, but this calculation involved variables that couldn't be quantified: honor, loyalty, the weight of promises made to people who trusted American soldiers to keep their word. Through her scope, Sarah watched Dr. Nazir raise her head, blood matting her dark hair but her eyes still carrying defiance. She was looking directly at the ridge where Sarah's team was positioned, as if she knew that somewhere in those rocks, American warriors were calculating the cost of her life against their own survival. The next artillery barrage impacted closer, showering Sarah and Bulldog with stone fragments and raising a dust cloud that temporarily obscured their view of the compound. When visibility returned, Sarah saw that the wolf had moved Dr. Nazir to a wooden post in the center of the courtyard and was pouring gasoline around the base. The threat was explicit. Any rescue attempt would result in the informant being burned alive. All call signs, this is Ghost, Sarah transmitted, her voice carrying a calm that belied the storm of calculations running through her mind. I have eyes on 70-plus Taliban fighters now in position around the compound. Convoy ETA is 8 minutes. Recommend immediate extraction to secondary LZ. But even as she spoke the words, Sarah was adjusting her rifle to track the wolf through the scope. Range, 860 meters and increasing as he moved deeper into the compound. Wind, variable, gusting between 6 knots. The shot was becoming more difficult by the second, but it was still possible for someone with her skills and equipment. The radio crackled with Bulldog's voice, speaking quietly so only she could hear. Ghost, I know what you're thinking. Don't do it. We get out together, or we don't get out at all. That's the deal. Sarah felt a smile touch her lips for the first time in hours. Bulldog understood her better than anyone, knew that she was calculating the odds of a one-woman holding action that would give her teammates time to reach extraction while she dealt with the wolf and his hostage. It was a plan that had perhaps a 5% chance of success, but sometimes 5% was better than 0. The compound's main gate opened again, revealing a scene that made Sarah's blood turn to ice. A group of fighters emerged carrying video equipment, cameras, tripods, and what looked like broadcast equipment. The wolf intended to stream Dr. Nazir's execution live, turning her death into propaganda that would inspire Taliban recruitment across the region. Viking, they're setting up for a broadcast execution, Sarah reported, her voice tight with controlled anger. We've got maybe 10 minutes before this becomes an international incident. The mathematics were becoming clearer, but no less brutal. Time was the most critical variable now, and it was running out faster than their ammunition. Commander Larson's voice cut through the tactical net like a blade, carrying 18 years of special operations experience and the weight of command. Decisions that would haunt him regardless of the outcome. Ghost, Thunder, Angel, listen up. I'm calling in a favor from an old friend. A C-130 Spectre is inbound, ETA 12 minutes. But they need us to mark targets and stay put for danger close fire support. Sarah felt her pulse quicken despite her training. Danger close meant the 105 millimeters. Howitzer rounds would be impacting within 600 meters of their position, close enough that a single miscalculation could obliterate the very people the gunship was trying to save. But it also meant that 60 Taliban fighters were about to discover why American close air support was legendary among both allies and enemies. Through her scope, Sarah watched the wolf position Dr. Nazir directly in front of the camera equipment. Her traditional Afghan clothing now torn and bloodied, but her posture still defiant. The surgeon understood what was happening. She had worked with American forces long enough to recognize the sound of incoming aircraft, the specific engine note of the XC-130's turboprops that meant salvation or death, depending on which side of the targeting pod you occupied. "Ghost, we need continuous eyes on that compound," Viking continued, his Norwegian accent thickening slightly under stress. "The Spectre needs real-time damage assessment and target designation. You're our forward observer until this thing is over." The responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a familiar weight. Forward observers directed the application of lethal force with surgical precision, walking high-explosive rounds onto targets while friendly forces maneuvered in the chaos. It was a job that required absolute calm under extreme pressure and the mathematical ability to translate three-dimensional battlefield geometry into targeting coordinates that could be transmitted to weapon systems miles away. Bulldog was already breaking out the laser designator, a device that would paint targets with invisible infrared light that the XC-130's sensors could detect and track. "Ghost, I've got the SOFLOM up and running. Just tell me where you want the magic to happen." Sarah's training kicked in, years of Joint Tactical Air Controller certification compressed into rapid-fire calculations. The compound spread out below them like a three-dimensional chessboard, each building and defensive position requiring individual assessment for threat level and collateral damage potential. Dr. Nazir's position in the central courtyard made direct fire support impossible. Any rounds that missed by even a few meters would kill the person they were trying to save. "Viking, this is Ghost. Recommend initial target package focus on the outer defensive perimeter. I'm seeing heavy machine gun positions in the northeast and southwest corners, plus what looks like a recoilless rifle emplacement on the main building's roof. If we can suppress the outer ring, maybe Thunder and Angel can maneuver to a better position." Thunder's voice crackled through the radio, pain evident but determination unwavering. "Ghost, I can still move. Angel's got me patched up enough to function, but we need covering fire to reach that secondary position. These bastards have us triangulated." Through her scope, Sarah could see the tactical problem clearly. The Taliban had established interlocking fields of fire that turned the rocky terrain into a killing field. Every piece of cover that might protect her teammates was already being watched by multiple weapon systems. Moving meant exposure, and exposure meant death against this many coordinated fighters. The sound of the approaching XC-130 was becoming audible now, a low, droning noise that seemed to emanate from the mountains themselves. Sarah had worked with Spectre gunships in Iraq and Syria, knew the devastating precision of their weapon systems and the professionalism of their crews. But she also knew that close air support was as much art as science, requiring split-second coordination between ground and air assets under conditions that allowed no margin for error. "Spectre 2-6, this is Ghost on primary frequency," Sarah transmitted, switching to the air-to-ground coordination channel. "We have danger close fire mission. Approximately 70 enemy combatants in prepared positions. Friendly forces marked with infrared strobes request immediate suppression of outer defensive perimeter." The XC-130's pilot responded with the calm professionalism that characterized Air Force Special Operations Command. "Ghost, Spectre 2-6 has you visual. We're tracking your strobes and have thermal imaging on the target compound. Be advised, we're seeing significant enemy movement in all quadrants. This is going to be a complex engagement. Sarah adjusted her scope to maximum magnification, studying the compound's layout with the intensity of someone whose teammates' lives depended on perfect target selection. The Wolf had positioned his fighters with obvious tactical training, overlapping sectors of fire, protected positions with multiple escape routes, and heavy weapons sighted to provide mutual support. But training and preparation could only go so far against the overwhelming technological advantage of American air power. The C-130 carried a 105mm howitzer, a 40mm cannon, and a 25mm Gatling gun, all guided by thermal imaging and radar systems that could track individual targets in complete darkness. It was medieval warfare meeting 21st century precision, and Sarah knew which side would prevail. Bulldog, laser designation on the northeast machine gun position, Sarah called to her spotter. Range 840 meters, elevation 15 feet above courtyard level. The invisible infrared beam painted the target, providing the C-130's sensors with precise coordinates for their first engagement. Sarah watched through her scope as the gunship banked into a left-hand turn, positioning itself for the attack. Run that would announce American presence to every Taliban fighter in the valley. The Wolf seemed to sense the approaching danger. He grabbed Dr. Nazir by the hair, dragging her closer to the camera equipment while shouting orders to his subordinates. Sarah could read lips well enough to understand some of the Pashto. He was telling them to accelerate the execution timeline, to kill the informant before American fire support could intervene. Spectre 2-6, priority target in courtyard center, male subject in black tactical gear holding hostage. Need immediate interdiction before he can execute the package. Sarah's voice carried controlled urgency, the tone of someone who understood that seconds could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Ghost, Spectre copies priority target, but we cannot engage with hostage in immediate proximity. Recommend suppression of surrounding positions to create maneuvering room for ground elements. The C-130's 40mm cannon opened fire, sending a stream of high explosive rounds into the compound's northeast corner. The heavy machine gun position disappeared in a series of bright flashes, the sound of detonations rolling across the valley like thunder. Secondary explosions suggested the crew had been storing ammunition nearby, a tactical mistake that Sarah filed away for future reference. The effect on the compound was immediate and dramatic. Taliban fighters scrambled for new positions, their coordinated defense beginning to break down as American firepower disrupted their carefully planned setup. But the Wolf maintained his grip on Dr. Nazir, using her as a human shield while retreating toward the compound's main building. Ghost, thunder here. The wounded SEAL's voice carried new energy despite his injuries. That fire support opened up a corridor on the south side. Angel and I can advance to within 300 meters if you can keep their heads down. Sarah was already adjusting her rifle to track individual targets fleeing the AC-130's devastating fire. The Dragunov's semi-automatic capability allowed for rapid engagement of multiple targets, and her years of training had developed the muscle memory necessary to transition between aims points with machine-like precision. The first Taliban fighter to expose himself died before he could fire a shot, Sarah's bullet catching him center mass as he tried to reposition a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The second fell as he attempted to set up a new machine gun position, the 7.62mm round punching through his chest with terminal efficiency. Targets down, south sector clear for your advance, Sarah reported, already tracking her scope toward the next threat. The mathematical beauty of precision shooting was most apparent in moments like this, geometry and physics combining to solve tactical problems that would otherwise require the lives of good people. Bulldog fed her target information. with the efficiency born of countless hours of training together. Ghost, RPG team moving to intercept Thunder and Angel. Range 650. Bearing southeast of your current point of aim. Sarah's scope found the two-man team carrying the distinctive shape of a Soviet-era RPG-7, their movement pattern suggesting they understood American small unit tactics and were positioning to ambush her teammates during their advance. The shot angle was challenging. Both men were moving parallel to her line of sight, requiring her to lead the targets based on their speed and direction. The mathematical calculation ran through her mind in microseconds. Target speed approximately 4 meters per second, range 650 meters, crosswind negligible. Lead the primary target by 2 body widths, account for bullet drop at this range. Apply gentle pressure to the trigger while tracking through the target's movement. The bullet found its mark just as the RPG gunner raised his weapon to fire. The impact spinning him around and sending the rocket-propelled grenade tumbling harmlessly into the rocks. His assistant tried to recover the weapon, but Sarah's follow-up shot dropped him before he could complete the task. RPG team neutralized, she reported, feeling the familiar satisfaction that came with protecting her teammates through precise application of lethal force. But the satisfaction was tempered by the tactical reality there were still 50-plus enemy fighters in the compound, and ammunition was becoming a critical factor. The AC-130 continued its methodical destruction of the compound's outer defenses, each gun run eliminating prepared positions and forcing the Taliban fighters into less advantageous locations. But the Wolf had reached the main building with Dr. Nazir, disappearing inside a structure that offered protection from air attack and clear fields of fire against any ground assault. "Viking, this is Ghost," Sarah transmitted, her voice carrying the weight of tactical assessment. Primary target has moved to hardened position with the package. Recommend coordinated assault air support to suppress, ground elements to breach and clear. Viking's response revealed the complexity of their situation. Ghost, understand your assessment, but we're still outnumbered 5-1, and Thunder's combat effectiveness is declining. Angel's doing her best, but he needs serious medical attention soon. Through her scope, Sarah watched Angel working on Thunder's wounded leg, the medic's skilled hands applying pressure bandages and administering pain medication, while maintaining tactical awareness of their surroundings. The sight reminded Sarah of why she fought not for politicians or ideologies, but for the people who had become her family through shared danger and mutual trust. The radio crackled with a new voice. Spectre 26's sensor operator providing real-time intelligence that would reshape their tactical options. Ghost, thermal imaging shows significant enemy movement in the valley approaches. Estimate 40 to 50 additional combatants inbound, ETA 6 minutes. You're about to be completely surrounded. The mathematics of their situation had just become even more brutal. 100 Taliban fighters against 6 American warriors, fighting in terrain that offered every advantage to the defenders. Sarah's mind raced through possible solutions, but each calculation led to the same conclusion: extraction was becoming impossible, and their mission was evolving from rescue to pure survival. But then Dr. Nazir appeared in one of the main buildings. Windows, and Sarah's world contracted to the circle of her rifle scope. The surgeon was fighting back, struggling against her captors despite being bound and outnumbered. Her courage in the face of certain death reminded Sarah of why some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds. "All call signs, this is Ghost," Sarah transmitted, her voice carrying a calm that surprised even her. "I'm going to take the shot on the Wolf. When I do, everyone moves Thunder and Angel to the compound. Viking to provide covering fire. Bulldog to spot for follow-up engagements." The plan was tactically insane, but sometimes insanity was the only rational response to impossible circumstances. Sarah had spent her entire adult life preparing for moments like this when training, courage, and mathematical precision would combine to create opportunities where none should exist. Through her scope, she watched the wolf position Dr. Nazir in front of the camera equipment one final time, preparing to broadcast her execution to the world. His arrogance was showing again. The belief that distance and cover made him untouchable by American snipers. He had never faced Ghost Chen, and he was about to learn why precision fire could indeed make any fight fair. The shot that would define. Everything came together in Sarah's mind like a complex equation solving itself. Wind velocity 3 knots, quartering from the northwest. Range to target, 923 meters at the outer edge of the Dragunov's effective range, but well within her capabilities. The wolf stood partially concealed behind a concrete pillar, using Dr. Nazir as human shield while gesturing dramatically for the camera, but arrogance had made him predictable. Sarah had been studying his movement patterns for 47 minutes, timing his gestures, measuring the precise distance he exposed himself with each theatrical motion. Every 17 seconds, he leaned forward to emphasize a point, exposing his left shoulder for exactly 1.4 seconds. It was a window smaller than a heartbeat, but Sarah had built her reputation on impossible shots. "Bulldog, confirm range and windage," she whispered, her voice carrying the calm that preceded violence. 923 meters, wind holding steady at 3 knots. You've got this, Ghost. Her spotter's confidence was absolute, built on 18 months of watching Sarah thread bullets through spaces that shouldn't accommodate them. Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear Thunder's labored breathing as Angel worked to keep him combat effective. The big SEAL had lost more blood than he was admitting, but his voice still carried the authority of someone accustomed to leading men into impossible situations. "Ghost, soon as you take that shot, this whole valley's gonna light up like the 4th of July. Hope you're ready for the aftermath." The aftermath. Sarah's mind calculated the sequence of events that would follow her bullet's impact. The wolf would drop, hopefully dead before he could harm Dr. Nazir, but his death would trigger coordinated fire from every weapon in the compound, revealing her position to fighters who would converge on her location with murderous intent. She would have perhaps 30 seconds to relocate before her current hide became untenable. "Spectre 2-6, this is Ghost," she transmitted to the orbiting gunship. "Preparing to engage priority target. Request immediate suppression of compound center courtyard once shot is confirmed." The AK-130's pilot responded with professional calm. "Ghost, Spectre copies. We're tracking your laser designation and have 40 millimeters ready for immediate engagement. Break glass when ready." Sarah's finger moved to the trigger, applying the first stage of pressure while her crosshairs settled on the precise point where the wolf's shoulder would appear in 3.2 seconds. Time seemed to crystallize around her, the chaos of battle fading into the mathematical purity of ballistics and timing. The wolf leaned forward, exactly as predicted, his left shoulder emerging from behind the concrete pillar as he gestured toward Dr. Nazir. Sarah's trigger broke cleanly, the rifle's recoil driving back into her shoulder as the 7.62 millimeters round began its journey across the valley. 923 meters. Flight time, 1.1 seconds. Through her scope, Sarah watched the bullet trace its perfect arc, following laws of physics that had governed her profession since humans first learned to kill at distance. The round struck the wolf's center mass in the exposed shoulder, the impact spinning him away from Dr. Nazir and dropping him to the courtyard floor. "Target down," Sarah called, immediately working the bolt to chamber another round. "Packages free." The compound erupted in chaos as the wolf's death triggered exactly the response Sarah had calculated. Muzzle flashes lit up windows and rooftops as Taliban fighters opened fire on her suspected position, their bullets sparking off rocks and whining into the distance. But Sarah was already moving. rolling to a secondary position 30 meters away that she had prepared hours earlier. The AK-130's 40mm cannon opened fire on the courtyard, high explosive rounds detonating among the camera equipment and scattering. The fighters who had been preparing for the execution broadcast, Dr. Nazir, still bound but very much alive, crawled toward the limited cover of a low wall as American firepower turned the compound center into a hellscape of flying debris and shrapnel. Thunder, Angel, move now. Vikings command cut through the tactical net as the two SEALs began their advance toward the compound, using the AC-130's suppressive fire as cover for their movement. Thunder's limp was more pronounced now, but his rifle never wavered as he provided covering fire for Angel's medical equipment. Sarah tracked her scope across the compound's rooftops, seeking targets among the fighters who were trying to coordinate their response to the American assault. The Dragunov's semi-automatic capability allowed her to engage multiple targets in rapid succession, each shot calculated for maximum tactical effect rather than simple elimination. A Taliban fighter appeared at a second-story window, carrying what looked like a Soviet-era Dragunov rifle, a counter-sniper sent to neutralize Sarah's position. She put a round through the window frame just as he was settling into a shooting position, the bullet catching him in the upper chest and spinning him back into the room's darkness. Counter-sniper down, second floor, northeast corner, Sarah reported, already tracking toward the next threat. Mathematics and intuition combined in the zone where she operated best, each target acquisition flowing seamlessly into the next engagement. Bulldog fed her target information with machine-like efficiency. Ghost, heavy machine gun crew setting. Up on the main building's roof. Range 780. They're trying to get angle on Thunder and Angel's approach. Sarah's scope found the crew manhandling a Soviet PKM machine gun into position, their movement suggesting they understood the tactical geometry well enough to create interlocking fields of fire with other weapon systems. The primary gunner was a tall man with distinctive facial scars, Ahmed Iron Jaw Haqqani, a former Pakistani army instructor who had been training Taliban fighters in crew-served weapons employment. The shot was technically challenging due to the elevated angle and the target's partial concealment behind a low parapet. Sarah adjusted her point of aim to account for the upward trajectory, placing her crosshairs on the visible portion of Iron Jaw's torso while calculating bullet drop over the 780-meter range. The trigger broke cleanly, sending another precisely aimed round downrange. Iron Jaw collapsed across his machine gun, the weapon tilting skyward as his body weight shifted the mounting. His assistant tried to take over the gun, but Sarah's follow-up shot dropped him before he could bring the weapon to bear on her advancing teammates. Roof crew neutralized, Sarah transmitted, feeling the familiar satisfaction of protecting friendly forces through precision fire. But satisfaction was tempered by tactical reality. She was drawing concentrated fire from multiple positions, and staying in any one location much longer would mean death. Thunder's voice crackled through the radio, pain evident but determination unwavering. Ghost, we're at the compound's outer wall. Angel's found an entrance point, but we need suppression on the courtyard before we can move to the package. Through her scope, Sarah could see Dr. Nazir had managed to work her way to better cover behind an overturned vehicle, but she was still exposed to fire from multiple directions. The surgeon's medical training had taught her basic trauma care, and she was applying pressure to what looked like a shrapnel wound on her left arm while scanning for escape routes. The AC-130 continued its methodical destruction of defensive positions, each gun run eliminating prepared emplacements and forcing the Taliban fighters into less advantageous locations. But the compound's construction provided numerous covered approaches and hardened positions that would allow determined defenders to continue resistance for hours. Spectre 2-6, this is Ghost, Sarah transmitted to the orbiting gunship. Friendly forces are entering the compound. Request shift fires to outer perimeter and approach routes. We've got Taliban reinforcements converging from multiple directions. The C-130 sensor operator confirmed Sarah's assessment with thermal imaging that revealed the scope of their tactical problem. Ghost, Spectre has eyes on 4-5 additional combatants approaching from the southeast, plus 2 technicals, with mounted weapons from the northwest. Your extraction window is closing rapidly. Sarah's mind raced through the mathematical possibilities of their situation. 6 Americans against nearly 100 Taliban fighters, fighting in terrain that provided every advantage to the defenders. Even with close air support, the odds were approaching impossible unless they could extract Dr. Nazir quickly and reach the emergency landing zone before being completely surrounded. But then Viking's voice carried news that changed everything. All call signs, be advised Chinook inbound for emergency extraction. ETA 8 minutes to primary LZ, but only if we can clear the landing zone of threats. 8 minutes. Sarah's training compressed the timeline into manageable segments, each minute representing specific objectives that would need to be accomplished with machine-like precision. Minute 1. Thunder and Angel extract Dr. Nazir from the compound. Minutes 2 through 4. Team movement to the landing zone while Sarah provides overwatch. Minutes 5 through 8. Suppress threats in the landing zone while the Chinook approaches and departs. It was theoretically possible, but only if every element of the plan executed flawlessly. And flawless execution was something Sarah had been trained to deliver regardless of the odds. Ghost to all call signs, she transmitted, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had found clarity in chaos. I'm repositioning to overwatch the LZ. Thunder, Angel get the package and move to extraction point Alpha. Viking, Bulldog establish security perimeter for helicopter approach. The plan required Sarah to move across nearly a kilometer of exposed terrain while under fire from multiple directions, then establish a new shooting position that would allow her to dominate the landing zone. It was tactically insane, but sometimes insanity was the only rational response to impossible circumstances. Sarah began her movement, flowing from cover to cover with the fluid grace that had kept her alive through dozens of similar situations. Behind her, the compound continued to burn as the AC-130's fires and Taliban secondary explosions created a hellscape that would be visible for miles. But her focus was entirely forward, calculating angles and distances to the landing zone while avoiding the searching fire of fighters who were beginning to understand the scope of the American rescue operation. The first Taliban patrol encountered Sarah as she crossed a rocky ridgeline 300 meters from her original position. 3 fighters moving in tactical formation, their AK-47s held in professional low-ready positions that suggested military training. They had been positioned to cut off American escape routes, but they hadn't expected to encounter a precision marksman operating alone. Sarah's first shot dropped the point man before he could raise his weapon, the 7.62 millimeters round catching him center mass and spinning him into his teammates. The second fighter managed to fire a burst from his AK-47, the bullets sparking off rocks near Sarah's position, but her return shot found him before he could adjust his aim. The third Taliban fighter proved more challenging. He had taken cover behind a large boulder and was attempting to coordinate with other patrols using a handheld radio. Sarah could hear fragments of his transmission grid coordinates that would bring concentrated fire onto her new position. Within minutes, the shot required threading her bullet through a gap in the rocks barely wider than the projectile itself. But Sarah had made similar shots in urban environments where the margins for error were even smaller. She adjusted her point of aim to account for the deflection angle, placing her crosshairs on the small portion of the fighter's torso visible through the gap. The bullet found its mark with mathematical precision, silencing the radio transmission and eliminating the immediate threat to her movement. But Sarah knew that other patrols would be converging on the sound of gunfire, and her window for reaching the landing zone was shrinking rapidly. "Ghost, Thunder here." The wounded SEAL's voice carried exhaustion but also relief. "We've got the package, and she's mobile. Angel says she's wounded, but can move under her own power. Ada to extraction point 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Sarah's mental chronometer began the countdown as she resumed her movement toward the landing zone, flowing across terrain that offered minimal concealment while Taliban fighters searched for the American sniper who was systematically eliminating their forces. The mathematics of survival had never been more complex. But Sarah had spent her entire adult life preparing for moments when precision, courage, and split-second decision-making would determine who lived and who died in Afghanistan's unforgiving mountains, and she had no intention of letting her teammates down when it mattered most. The landing zone materialized through Sarah's scope like a geometric puzzle demanding perfect solutions. The rocky plateau stretched 300 meters across, surrounded by elevated positions that would allow Taliban fighters to pour devastating fire onto any aircraft attempting to land. 2 burned-out Soviet vehicles provided the only substantial cover, their twisted metal skeletons serving as grim reminders of Afghanistan's appetite for foreign military hardware. Sarah established her overwatch position on a ridge 800 meters southeast of the LZ, her Dragunov rifle providing commanding views of the approaches that enemy forces would use to threaten the extraction. Through her earpiece, she could hear the distinctive whine of the approaching Chinook helicopter, its twin rotors beating against the thin mountain air as it navigated through valleys that had claimed dozens of aircraft over the past 2 decades. "Ghost. Viking here." Commander Larson's voice carried the weight of command decisions that would define the mission's outcome. "Chinook is 3 minutes out, but thermal imaging shows Taliban forces moving to encircle the LZ. We need those approach routes clear before the bird commits to landing." Through her scope, Sarah could see the truth of Viking's assessment. Dust clouds marked the movement of at least 6 Taliban patrols, converging on the landing zone from multiple directions, their timing coordinated with military precision that suggested someone with formal training was directing their movements. The mathematics of the tactical situation were becoming more complex by the minute. "Roger, Viking. I have eyes on multiple threats." Sarah's voice carried the calm precision that had become her trademark under fire. "Beginning engagement sequence. Now." The first patrol appeared on a ridgeline 600 meters north of the LZ. 5 fighters moving in staggered formation with what looked like a Soviet-era RPG launcher. Their positioning would allow them to engage the Chinook during its most vulnerable phase, the 60-second window when the helicopter would be stationary on the ground while her teammates and Dr. Nazir climbed aboard. Sarah's crosshairs settled on the RPG gunner, a bearded man in traditional Afghan dress whose confident movements suggested extensive combat experience. The shot required compensating for a 15-degree upward angle and a crosswind that had shifted to nearly 5 knots. But these were variables Sarah had been calculating instinctively for years. The trigger broke cleanly, sending the 7.62 millimeters round across the valley with mathematical precision. The RPG gunner collapsed, his weapon tumbling down the rocky slope as his teammates scrambled for cover. Sarah was already working the bolt for a follow-up shot, her muscle memory allowing her to engage the second target before the first had even hit the ground. "North Patrol neutralized," she reported, tracking her scope toward the next threat. Continuing suppression fires. The second patrol had taken cover in a cluster of boulders 400 meters west of the LZ, their position, offering excellent concealment, but limiting their fields of fire. Sarah could see muzzle flashes as they engaged Thunder and Angel's approach, but their accuracy was poor due to the range and the stress of operating under precision fire from an invisible enemy, Bulldog, who had moved to a supporting position 300 meters from Sarah's hide. began calling out target information with the efficiency born of countless training exercises. Ghost, heavy machine gun crew setting up in the boulder field. They're trying to get angle on the LZ. Sarah's scope found the crew wrestling a PKM machine gun into firing position. Their movements hurried, but professional. The primary gunner was a young man, probably no more than 20, but his handling of the weapon suggested he had been well trained in crew-served weapons employment. War had a way of aging fighters quickly in Afghanistan, turning teenagers into hardened combatants who understood the brutal mathematics of survival. The shot was technically challenging due to the partial concealment and the target's constant movement. But Sarah had faced similar problems in urban environments, where civilian considerations made precision even more critical. She placed her crosshairs on the gunner's center mass, leading him slightly as he adjusted the weapon's position. The bullet found its mark, just as the machine gun was coming to bear on the landing zone, the impact spinning the gunner away from his weapon and sending the PKM tumbling among the rocks. His assistant tried to recover the gun, but Sarah's follow-up shot discouraged further efforts at bringing the weapon back into action. "Machine gun crew down," Sarah transmitted, already tracking toward the next threat. But the tactical situation was evolving rapidly, and new problems were emerging faster than she could solve them individually. The radio crackled with Thunder's voice, pain evident, but determination unwavering. "Ghost, we're 200 meters from the LZ with the package. Dr. Nazir's mobile, but she's lost some blood. Angel's keeping her stable, but we need that bird on the ground soon." Through her scope, Sarah could see her teammates moving across the broken terrain. Thunder's limp more pronounced now, but his rifle still steady as he provided security for Angel and Dr. Nazir. The surgeon was keeping pace despite her injuries, her medical training providing the mental discipline necessary to function under extreme stress. But the Taliban forces were closing the net with coordinated precision that spoke of careful planning and professional leadership. Sarah's thermal scope revealed heat signatures moving through covered approaches on 3 sides of the landing zone, their timing designed to create interlocking fields of fire, just as the Chinook committed to landing. "Spectre 2-6, this is Ghost," Sarah transmitted to the orbiting SC-130. "Request immediate suppression of grid coordinates I'm about to transmit. Danger close to friendly forces, but we need those approach routes interdicted now." The gunship's pilot responded with the calm professionalism that characterized Air Force Special Operations Command. "Ghost, Spectre has thermal contact on multiple enemy elements. We're tracking your laser designations and have 40 millimeters ready for immediate engagement." Sarah began walking laser-guided fire onto the converging Taliban patrols, each designation resulting in precise 40 millimeters cannon fire that shattered prepared positions and forced fighters to choose between effective cover and effective fields of fire. The combination of air support and precision ground fire was creating tactical problems that the Taliban couldn't solve with conventional infantry tactics, but the enemy adaptation was rapid and professional. Instead of massing for coordinated attacks, they began operating in smaller elements that used natural cover to approach firing positions, where the AK-130's weapons couldn't reach them without endangering friendly forces. "All call signs, this is Chinook 37. The helicopter pilot's voice cut through the tactical net with news that changed everything. "We're taking heavy fire from multiple directions. I can hold station for 90 seconds max before fuel considerations force us to abort." 90 seconds. Sarah's mental chronometer began the countdown as she calculated the geometry of salvation and destruction. Thunder and Angel were still 60 meters from the landing zone. Dr. Nazir was wounded and exhausted, and Taliban fighters were in positions that would allow them to pour devastating fire onto the helicopter during the most vulnerable phase of extraction. The mathematical solution required something that went beyond training and equipment. It demanded the kind of precision that separated competent snipers from legends. Sarah needed to suppress 6 different firing positions simultaneously while her teammates completed their movement to the extraction point. "Viking, this is Ghost," she transmitted, her voice carrying a calm that surprised even her. "I'm going to provide continuous suppression fires while you load the package. Do not stop for anything, just get to that bird and get everyone home." The plan was tactically insane, requiring Sarah to expose herself to concentrated fire from multiple directions, while engaging targets as fast as she could work the rifle's bolt action. But sometimes tactical insanity was the only rational response to impossible mathematics. Sarah began her engagement sequence, flowing from target to target with the fluid precision that had made her reputation among special operations snipers. Each shot was calculated for maximum psychological effect as well as lethality, designed to force Taliban fighters to choose between effective fire positions and personal survival. The first target fell as he tried to maneuver closer to the landing zone, Sarah's bullet catching him in the upper torso as he moved between rocks. The second died attempting to set up a rocket launcher, the 7.62mm round finding him just as he was preparing to fire at the approaching helicopter. But the volume of return fire was becoming overwhelming. Bullets sparked off rocks around Sarah's position, forcing her to move constantly while maintaining the rapid rate of fire necessary to keep multiple threats suppressed. Her ammunition was running critically low, but stopping to reload would give the Taliban fighters the opportunity they needed to coordinate effective fire on the extraction. "Ghost, Thunder here." The wounded SEAL's voice carried exhaustion but also profound gratitude. "We're at the bird, loading the package now. Angel says 30 seconds and we're airborne." 30 seconds. Sarah's world contracted to the mechanical rhythm of target acquisition, trigger press, bolt operation, target acquisition. The Dragunov's action was heating up from the sustained rate of fire, but the rifle continued to function with the reliability that had made Soviet weapons legendary among professionals. A Taliban fighter appeared on the ridge directly above the landing zone, carrying what looked like a Chinese-made RPG launcher. His position would allow him to engage the Chinook at point-blank range, turning the helicopter into a fireball that would kill everyone aboard. The shot required threading her bullet through a gap in the rocks while compensating for the extreme upward angle, but Sarah had made similar shots in Fallujah when insurgents had tried to ambush convoys from elevated positions. She adjusted her point of aim to account for the ballistic trajectory, placing her crosshairs on the small portion of the fighter's torso visible through the gap. The trigger broke cleanly, sending what would be her final round from this position across the valley with mathematical precision. The RPG gunner collapsed, his weapon tumbling down the rocky slope as the Chinook's engine spooled up for immediate departure. "Package secure, all personnel aboard." Viking's voice carried relief that was audible even through the tactical radio's compression. "Ghost, time to go. We're not leaving without you." But Sarah was already moving, flowing across terrain that offered minimal concealment, while Taliban fighters converged on her last known position. The extraction had been successful, but her own survival now depended on reaching the helicopter before concentrated fire made her position untenable. The distance to the Chinook was only 200 meters, but it might as well have been 2 kilometers, given the amount of fire being directed at anything that moved in the open. Sarah began her sprint across broken ground that offered no cover, trusting in speed and unpredictability to carry her through the gauntlet of aimed fire. Bullets cracked past her head and sparked off rocks at her feet, but Sarah's focus was entirely on the helicopter's loading ramp, where she could see Thunder and Viking providing covering fire while Angel tended to Dr. Nazir's wounds. The mathematical precision that had governed her shooting now applied to movement, each stride calculated for maximum efficiency while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. The final 50 meters felt like an eternity compressed into seconds. But Sarah reached the Chinook's ramp just as the pilot began his emergency departure. Thunder's massive hand grabbed her tactical vest, hauling her aboard as the helicopter lifted off in a cloud of dust and debris that provided momentary concealment from the ground fire. As the aircraft climbed toward the safety of altitude, Sarah looked back at the valley that had nearly claimed her team's lives. Smoke rose from dozens of positions where American firepower had found Taliban fighters, but she knew that within hours, other fighters would occupy those same positions, continuing Afghanistan's endless cycle of violence. But today, 6 Americans and 1 brave Afghan surgeon were going home alive. In the mathematical equations that governed warfare, that was a solution Sarah could live with. 6 months later, Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan. Sarah stood at the edge of the tarmac, watching another Chinook disappear into the Afghan sky, its twin rotors beating against air that carried the familiar scent of diesel fuel and distant cooking fires. The morning sun painted the Hindu Kush mountains in shades of gold and purple, beautiful enough to make someone forget that those peaks had been claiming lives for millennia. Her hands no longer shook when helicopters lifted off. That particular symptom of what the psychologists called operational stress had faded around month 3 of her mandatory recovery period. Dr. Amara Nazir approached with the quiet confidence that had made her one of Bagram's most respected trauma surgeons. The scars on her left arm from that day in the valley had healed into thin white lines, but her eyes carried the depth that came from looking death in the face and choosing to continue living anyway. In the 6 months since the extraction, she had saved 17 American lives and countless Afghan civilians, working 18-hour days with the dedication of someone who understood the value of borrowed time. "Ghost," she said, using the call sign that had become Sarah's preferred name even in civilian conversation. "The ceremony is starting in 10 minutes. You ready for this?" Sarah smiled, adjusting the dress blue uniform that felt foreign after months of desert camouflage and tactical gear. Today she would receive the Navy Cross for her actions in the valley, the nation's second highest award for valor, recognizing what the citation described as extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming enemy forces. But the medal felt less important than the fact that Thunder was walking without a limp again, that Angel had been promoted to chief hospital corpsman, that Dr. Nazir was continuing her work saving lives in Afghanistan's ongoing war. "Ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, checking her watch with the precision that had become second nature during 8 years of special operations. The ceremony would last exactly 37 minutes, followed by a reception that she would endure for the minimum time required by military protocol before escaping to the quiet of her quarters. The past 6 months had been a study in adjustment and reflection. Sarah had been rotated out of direct combat operations, assigned to train the next generation of precision marksmen at the Naval Special Warfare Center. The work was important, passing on hard-won knowledge to young sailors who would face the same impossible mathematics of survival that had defined her career, but it lacked the immediate clarity of purpose that came with protecting teammates under fire. Thunder appeared from the direction of the base hospital, his massive frame moving with the easy confidence that had made him a natural leader among SEALs. The shrapnel wound that had nearly ended his career had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar that he wore like a badge of honor. His promotion to Master Chief Petty Officer had been announced the previous month, recognizing not just his actions in the valley, but 15 years of exemplary service in the world's most dangerous places. "Ghost, you clean up nice," he said with the grin that had lifted team morale through dozens of difficult operations. "Though I still prefer you in ghillie suit and war paint." "Give me time," Sarah replied, feeling the familiar warmth that came from being around people who had shared mortal danger and emerged stronger for the experience. "This uniform's just for show. I'll be back in the field soon enough." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah knew that something fundamental had changed. During those hours in the Afghan valley, the mathematical precision that had always governed her approach to combat now extended to every aspect of her life, creating a clarity of purpose that went beyond the immediate tactical requirements of military service. Viking joined them, his Norwegian accent more pronounced than usual, a sign that he was processing complex emotions despite his professional demeanor. The promotion to commander had placed him in charge of training operations for an entire SEAL team, but he still carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who led by example rather than rank. "Team's all here," he announced, gesturing toward the approaching figure of Angel, who moved with the practiced efficiency that had made her legendary among special operations medics. Her recent assignment to the Navy's most advanced trauma training program represented recognition of skills honed in the crucible of combat medicine. Angel carried a manila folder containing photographs from their reunion with Dr. Nazir's family images that captured joy and relief in ways that words couldn't express. The surgeon's husband and 2 children had believed her dead until the moment she walked through their front door in Kabul, escorted by a security detail that ensured their safety during the reunion. "Thought you'd want to see these," Angel said, handing Sarah the folder with the gentle smile that had comforted wounded warriors across multiple combat zones. "Dr. Nazir's daughter wants to be a doctor when she grows up. Says she wants to help people the way her mother does." Sarah studied the photographs, feeling something shift in her chest as she looked at images of a family reunited because 6 Americans had chosen to risk everything for someone who had already risked everything for them. The mathematical equations that governed warfare suddenly seemed less important than the human connections that gave those equations meaning. The ceremony proceeded with military precision, each element choreographed to honor valor while maintaining the dignity befitting the sacrifice of those who had given their lives in service to their country. General Morrison, the commander of Joint Special Operations Command, delivered remarks that captured both the strategic importance of the mission and the tactical excellence demonstrated by the team. But Sarah's attention was focused on the faces in the small audience, fellow warriors who understood the weight of the medal being placed around her neck, family members who had learned to live with the constant anxiety of loving someone who chose profession danger, and Dr. Nazir, whose presence served as a living reminder that some victories were worth any cost. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The citation was read aloud, each word carefully chosen to convey the tactical situation, without revealing operational details that remained classified. For extraordinary heroism while serving as precision marksman with a Joint Special Operations Task Force during combat operations against enemy forces, demonstrated exceptional marksmanship and tactical acumen while engaging numerically superior enemy forces. Actions directly contributed to the successful extraction of a high-value asset and the preservation of American lives. Sarah stood at attention as the medal was placed around her neck, but her mind was already calculating the future. The Navy Cross carried obligations that went beyond personal recognition. It represented a standard of excellence that would need to be maintained throughout the remainder of her career and beyond. 2 years later, Naval Special Warfare Center, Coronado, California. The young sailor trembled slightly as she settled into the shooting position, her M40 Phase 6 rifle wavering despite the bipod support. Petty Officer 2nd Class Jennifer Rookie Martinez had graduated at the top of her sniper school class, but this was her first time shooting under the direct supervision of Ghost Chen, whose reputation had grown to near mythical proportions within the special operations community. "Breathe," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the calm authority that had been developed through years of training others to kill at distance. "The target isn't going anywhere. Take your time, check your fundamentals, and trust your training." The range at Coronado stretched for 1,000 meters, offering every conceivable shooting scenario from urban environments to mountain warfare. Sarah had designed much of the curriculum herself, incorporating lessons learned from 8 deployments and more than 50 confirmed kills in combat. But her focus now was on creating the next generation of precision marksmen who would face threats that hadn't existed when she was learning her trade. Martinez's shot broke cleanly, the .300 Winchester Magnum round finding its mark at 800 meters with the precision that marked a natural shooter. Sarah noted the group size in her training. Martinez was developing into the kind of marksman who could make impossible shots when American lives hung in the balance. "Better," Sarah observed, studying the target through her spotting scope. "But you're still fighting the recoil instead of managing it. Remember, the rifle is just a tool. Your mind is the weapon that matters." The lesson was interrupted by the arrival of Master Chief Thunder Williams, whose assignment to the Naval Special Warfare Center had created one of the most effective training partnerships in military history. His expertise in small unit tactics, combined with Sarah's precision marksmanship, had produced marksmen who were setting new standards for effectiveness in combat. "Ghost, we've got visitors," Thunder announced, gesturing toward the approaching vehicle that carried the distinctive markings of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Looks like someone wants to discuss your next assignment." Sarah felt her pulse quicken despite her training. Administrative visits were routine, but unscheduled meetings with senior leadership usually meant operational requirements that would take her away from the relatively safe world of training and back into the moral complexity of combat. The vehicle stopped near the firing line, disgorging 2 figures whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere on the range. Admiral Rebecca Hayes, the first female commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had broken barriers through competence rather than politics. Beside her, Dr. Nazir carried herself with the poise that had made her a symbol of courage within the special operations community. "Chief Chen," Admiral Hayes said, using Sarah's new rank with the respect it deserved, "we need to talk. There's a situation developing that requires your particular skill set." Sarah secured her training materials and followed the group to a secure conference room where classified discussions could take place without risk of compromise. The walls were covered with maps of current operational areas: Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and a dozen other locations where American Special Operations Forces were engaged in the endless war against terrorism. Dr. Nazir spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen the consequences of both action and inaction. "Ghost, there are 12 medical personnel being held hostage in northern Syria. International aid workers who were providing trauma care to civilians, caught in the fighting. Intelligence suggests they're being held by the same network that captured me." The tactical display showed satellite imagery of a compound that looked disturbingly familiar: concrete walls, multiple defensive positions, and terrain that favored defenders over any rescue attempt. Sarah's mind automatically began calculating ranges and angles, her training asserting itself despite the supposed safety of a classroom environment. Admiral Hayes continued the briefing with the professional detachment that characterized senior military leadership. "The political situation is complex, but the bottom line is simple. 12 innocent people are going to die unless someone with your capabilities can provide the precision fire support necessary for a successful rescue operation." Sarah studied the imagery, noting details that spoke to both opportunity and challenge. The compound was located in mountainous terrain similar to Afghanistan, but the tactical situation would be complicated by the presence of civilian refugees who had sought shelter near the aid workers' facility. Precision fire would need to be even more precise, with no margin for error that might result in civilian casualties. "What's the timeline?" Sarah asked, her mind already shifting from instructor mode to operational planning. 72 hours, Admiral Hayes replied. "The team is already being assembled." Thor team from Devagru, plus specialists chosen specifically for this mission profile. You would serve as precision marksman and forward observer for close air support. The mathematics were becoming clearer, but they were complicated by variables that had nothing to do with ballistics or tactical geometry. Sarah had spent 2 years building a life that didn't revolve around the immediate possibility of violent death, creating relationships that weren't defined by shared mortal danger. Returning to combat meant abandoning that progress and embracing the psychological costs that came with precision killing. But the alternative was allowing 12 innocent people to die because she had chosen personal comfort over professional obligation. "I'll need to review the complete intelligence package," Sarah said, her voice carrying the calm certainty that had defined her career. Full technical specifications on available weapon systems, detailed meteorological data for the target area, and complete psychological profiles on the hostage takers. Dr. Nazir reached across the table, her hand briefly covering Sarah's a gesture that conveyed gratitude without need for words. "They saved my life when it mattered most. Now you have the chance to save theirs." The mission briefing lasted 3 hours, covering every conceivable detail from insertion methods to extraction contingencies. Sarah absorbed the information with the systematic approach that had kept her alive through dozens of similar operations. But she was also aware of the weight of expectation that came with her reputation. Young sailors like Martinez looked up to her as a role model, proof that excellence could overcome any obstacle. Veterans like Thunder respected her as a peer who had earned her place through competence rather than politics. And people like Dr. Nazir saw her as a symbol of American commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. 4 years later, Arlington National Cemetery, Virginia. The funeral procession moved with military precision through the rolling hills of Arlington, each element choreographed to honor the sacrifice of Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Bulldog Rodriguez, who had died of cancer 3 months after his retirement from active duty. Sarah walked behind the horse-drawn caisson, her dress blue uniform perfectly pressed despite the emotional weight that made every step feel like a march through concrete. Bulldog had been her spotter for 3 years and her friend for life, the man who had called wind speeds and ranges while she threaded bullets through impossible spaces. His death represented the end of an era, not just for Sarah personally, but for an entire generation of special operations personnel who had defined American military excellence in the early decades of the 21st century. Thunder walked beside her, his own uniform bearing the ribbons and decorations that marked a career spent in the world's most dangerous places. His promotion to Command Master Chief had made him one of the most senior enlisted personnel in naval special warfare. But his presence at the funeral was that of a friend saying goodbye to someone who had shared the weight of impossible decisions. Behind them, Angel carried herself with the quiet dignity that had characterized her response to loss throughout multiple deployments. Her recent assignment as senior instructor at the Navy's Advanced Combat Medicine program represented recognition of skills that had saved dozens of lives. But today, she was simply someone mourning the loss of a teammate who had become family. Dr. Nazir attended the service despite the security concerns that came with her continued work in Afghanistan. Her presence served as a reminder that some friendships transcended nationality and politics, forged in moments when life and death decisions created bonds stronger than blood. The ceremony proceeded with the dignity befitting a warrior who had served with distinction, but Sarah's attention was focused on the faces of